Ali, how are you?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming.
I'm Alie I run the behavioral arm at YouGov, which is essentially all the data that we extract from our panelists that isn't survey based, right? We do link it back to the survey mechanism, but generally we are tracking and observing behaviors and paying our panelists directly from that. So it spans from, cross-platform streaming of, Severance or what I've been watching in White Lotus, to online behaviors and search history, purchase behavior data. We even track chat GPT engagement. So we're really empowering panelists to monetize their own data. That's the ethos.
So look, we've got a fantastic conversation to have because it's about exposure versus engagement versus purchase, which is the holy grail to get that balance right. But what? Let's just take a step back for a second because I'd really love your opinion on just what really matters, what outcome really matters when it does come to media.
So I think context is key, right? I think, obviously impressions, engagement are never going to go away. That's going to be sort of the truth of many marketers. But I think the real challenge is they're not actually understanding the context of that engagement enough, and therefore not linking it enough to endpoint conversion. And that again doesn't actually have to be purchase behavior. I mean, purchase behavior may not be relevant to your brand. It may just be you're trying to build that audience. You're trying to understand who that segment that is most interested in your brand is, and then ultimately, eventually, drive that conversion. But I think what brands make the mistake of doing is they don't actually find a data set that links all of these things together, right? The sort of the real and current customers and how they're engaging as well as the future customers. Like, what are they engaging with that isn't your brand, that can help you align better with them? I think that sort of endpoint context, and how they're engaging with your brand is so important to the impressions and engagement.
How do you navigate that as a business? Like, I, I'm here creating a platform, to help us navigate through this crazy world, and data is really important to me. But obviously, in my own search for data, I'll naturally seek out the stuff that qualifies what I'm talking about. So, how how do as a business really manage data properly? And how does your service kind of deliver?
I think it's sort of the echo chamber of looking at only those who convert, right? I think brands make the mistake of spending a little bit too much money on customers that are sort of already customers. And they're not focused enough on the converters, which in fact will reveal that your marketing plan isn't working, right? I think
That?
that ultimately you need to be available to that information. You need to sort of look for the right audience, and that right audience might currently be your wrong audience. Because understanding as deeply as you can why the non conversion, like that's actually where it starts to get interesting.
Let's talk about programmatic. You've said, like, what are the challenges around programmatic? And because I've got some massively personal opinions on this, but I would love to hear your point.
One of the biggest issues with programmatic media sort of placement is that you have no idea the context of your ad, right? You do not know, where that's actually being placed and at what moment necessarily, and potentially it's hitting the right people in the right segment, but that's obviously making the assumption that you know exactly who you should be hitting. I actually think it's more important to know the context with which you're having that relationship with the audience, because you can be more effective, right? So figuring out exactly what content is resonating with your target audience, and that could be both the content itself as well as the format of that content, is really.
The challenge I've got, and just to, because again, you've got a valid opinion here, is like a lot of the data in my mind is coming out to show that media, for want of a better word, has mistreated or been misinvested in, because there are these stats throwing around, like, for 40 to 50% of digital media is reaching bots, not real human beings. They're
Right.
saying that, 30%, at least 30% of marketing spends are now being wasted because it's not hitting the actual audience you want it to hit. So what's your answer to that? And how does yours, like, talk me through it?
What we try to do in a more sort of human centric behavioral tracking approach is we don't focus on impressions or engagement. We actually focus on unique data points that help our clients sort of segment audiences in a better way. So I'll give an example. Episodic viewership is not usually tracked in ad tech. Like what actual episode was engaged by that particular audience, and in fact, often the show level data is not tracked very well. You know how much time the viewers spent on that particular platform in that moment, but in general, the understanding of what content is driving the most engagement is just held by that streaming platform and not necessarily the buyers or the brands themselves. But there are data sets, not just ours, but others as well, where you can actually get to the granularity of this sort of consumption. And that helps you understand how to not just sort of blindly serve an ad, but know and have better personalization around what you're serving. So at YouGov Behavioral, we've created a fully GDPR compliant, CCPA compliant application that allows our panelists to upload their behavioral data. And that's across a number of different sources. As I mentioned earlier, streaming, banking, searching, shopping, e commerce, even ChatGPT. What we do is then combine that with all of the survey data we've collected on those individuals. So that is opinions and attitudes and things you actually can't get with behavioral. And so the combination of the two is that sort of say and do gap that we often see where the two combined give you an insane amount of information, right? You're able to really dissect how these customers or audiences want to be seen by you, right, in terms of their responses. And then you get to compare that against what are they actually doing against real behaviors across any particular data set that's most resonant to you.
Nice, I like it. This is so, it kind of, to me, this makes so much sense. Why isn't it the norm? Why, you know yeah, why?
I
Basically.
mean, I think that's a good question. If I were to build a media plan based on YouGov data, it would look something like this, right? So first, I would learn about my current customer. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can run surveys, you can use audience profiling tools. But what I love about some of this historical data and sort of ongoing refreshed segmentation and audience profiling tools that we have at YouGov is really about learning about your current customer and learning exactly why they've converted and really learn about these most valued customers. That you know it's not just what channels are they using or they're consuming, but what do they think about? What do they care about? Right? How can you build your brand towards the immediate needs? I think Carrie had talked about the sort of human centric approach to brand alliance. Like, I completely agree with that. I think it's really starting to understand the identity of your core consumers through some of these really, really in depth audience profiling tools. And that could be behavioral or it could be survey based. And then, learn more about your format customer, learn about your non-customers, right? Like who are they buying from if they're not buying from you? Where are they spending most of their time? Of course, doesn't necessarily matter if well, I should say it matters depending on your purchase cycle, right? If you're a car brand, you're looking for a 1 to 4 year sales cycle. If you're a CPG brand, it's obviously shorter. So it does depend on the type of brand you're working with. But in either case, if you look at both those perspectives, you have both a retention plan and a cultivation plan, which is obviously necessary for modern sort of media planning. But what's most important to remember is that you're not just hitting your individual, like current customers or former customers with an ad, right? It isn't that's not the only way that you can touch your customers. You should be thinking about a more holistic approach that sort of takes into account being there when they're searching for you. And so you need to understand where they're spending their time and sort of find these moments of access that I would say would be an optimized advertisement campaign. And maybe it is immersive and maybe it is more about brand activation and partnership. Maybe it is about creating really funny content like Liquid Death, right? It's sort of this holistic approach is less about how do I get this particular ad to the right people and saying, no, actually, how do I identify the moment where they're about to buy my product and how do I get an ad in front of them right then and there? Doesn't have to be an ad. It can be more creative than that, but that's I think the missing link in modern development media planning. Essentially, we looked at a comparison between survey responses for a particular group of individuals, and then we looked at their behaviors. And the question was, why do you buy a certain toy? Why do you buy toys? And the response predominantly was, I go with the cheapest option. That was sort of above brand recognition or even a variety of other things that you'd think would be the driving factor. Then we looked at those same people. In fact, we identified one person that said the cheapest option is what they chose. And in fact, we looked at it 2 or 3 days worth of behavioral data, and this is what they did. They Googled, Harry Potter Lego, and they went to the actual Lego page, and they, searched Harry Potter options, and they found a particular product. And then the next day, they went back to their computer and they Googled Harry Potter Diagon Alley, which is the product they were looking at the Lego page, and found the same product on eBay. I think they got sort of spooked on that. And then went to Target and searched for it again and ended up buying that same product through the Target website that they had originally looked at 2 days ago on the Lego website. Now, I bring that example up because obviously they probably still went with the cheapest option, right? The survey data still holds. What I think is so important to note is that Lego is obviously undercutting their own, cannibalizing their own sales with a variety of availability of their same products in other locations and not making it unique on their website. With the small tweak of you get this one extra dragon in the Diagon Alley version that you buy on the Lego website. I mean, obviously, I'm not in toy manufacturing, so I don't know the logistics of that. But that could be one small tweak that drives consumers to buy on their website, which I'm sure is what they're trying to do. So it's just looking at the alternatives of data sets to sort of answer different questions. I think it's a sort of mistake to say, you can replace survey data with behavioral because you really can't. We wouldn't have known about the cheapest option had we not surveyed them. But I do think it's really important to take these nuggets of insights and they're really actionable. They're things that will tell you the real why behind something that I think is sort of unprecedented in